Imagine for a second that you are stuck in traffic in modern Mexico City.
Not hard to do.
Not at all. It is one of the most sensory overloading places on Earth. You've got the heat, the honking horns, the sheer density of 22 million people,
Right.
all surrounded by this just endless sprawl of concrete and asphalt. It feels like the ultimate example of the modern urban jungle.
It really does.
But, and this is where the history we have gathered today gets really haunting, if you could just peel back that layer of asphalt, if you could look beneath the foundations of those skyscrapers, you wouldn't find dirt.
No. You would find a ghost.
A ghost city.
And not just a metaphorical ghost. You would find the physical remains of a civilization that was, at its peak, larger than London, cleaner than Paris, and, probably richer than Rome.
And it was built on water.
You'd find a city that didn't just sit on the land, it floated on water.
We're talking, of course, about the Aztecs, or, as we are going to learn to call them today, the Mexica.
That's a really key distinction, yeah.
Now, I have been going through this stack of research you sent over, and I think we need to address the elephant in the room immediately. Everyone has a mental image of the Aztecs. You think gold, you think massive pyramids, and let's be honest.
Human sacrifice.
Human sacrifice. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
Which is certainly part of the story. It is the part that gets all the sensational headlines and, movie treatments. But if we only focus on the blood and the gold, we miss the much more unlikely and, frankly, much more impressive story.
Which is?
This is a story of how a group of refugees, people who were literally considered nobodies, barbarians, managed to build the most sophisticated empire in the Western Hemisphere.
Only to lose it all.
In the blink of an eye, historically speaking.
That is the mission for this deep dive. We are going on what the notes call a continuity quest. We aren't just looking at the fall. We are tracking this rise from a cave to an empire and then looking at the collapse that wasn't actually an end.
It's a story of transformation, not extinction.
We have a massive amount of material here covering everything from the dog people of the north to the sun eaters of the valley. So let's start at the very beginning, the origin story.
To understand the Aztecs, or the Mexica, you have to understand where they believe they came from. I mean, every great empire has a mythic starting point. Rome had Romulus and Remus.
Right.
The Mexica had Aztlan.
Aztlan. I see that name pop up constantly in Chicano literature and modern movements. But in the context of the 12th century, what are we actually talking about? Is it a real place?
That's the million-dollar question. It translates to the place of whiteness or the place of herons. In their mythology, this was a paradise, an island in a lake far to the north.
A paradise they left.
Yes. Now, when archaeologists and historians look at the migration patterns and the linguistic evidence, Aztlan likely corresponds to the arid lands of northern Mexico or even the American Southwest. We are talking about the region often called Arido America.
So less of a paradise and more of a desert.
Pretty much. And looking at the descriptions of the people living there at the time, these weren't the pyramid builders yet. Not by a long shot.
Far from it.
These were the Chichimeca.
I wanted to ask about that term. In the notes, it says it translates to dog people. That feels specifically aggressive.
It was absolutely a derogatory term used by the civilized, city-dwelling peoples of central Mexico to describe the nomads of the north.
So it was an insult.
A major one. Chichimeca implied you were uncivilized, that you were like one step up from an animal. These were hunter-gatherers. They wore animal skins, they lived in caves or temporary shelters, and their main weapon was the bow and arrow.
Which was seen as primitive.
Compared to the sophisticated obsidian swords and cotton armor that would later define Aztec warfare, yes, they were the scrappy underdogs of the ancient world.
So the mighty Aztecs started out as the dog people of the desert. That is quite the trajectory. But something sparked the movement. Why leave this place of whiteness, even if it was a desert?
A god. Around the year 1100 CE, their patron deity speaks to their priests. This is Huitzilopochtli.
Huitzilopochtli. That is a name that commands respect, but the translation is surprising. Hummingbird of the South.
Or hummingbird on the left side being the South in their cosmology.
Right, and I think for a modern listener, a hummingbird sounds cute, like a little garden decoration.
Yeah.
But the notes emphasize that this is a total misunderstanding of Aztec biology.
Completely. We see a hummingbird and we think of this delicate little bird sipping nectar. But if you actually observe them in nature, and the Aztecs were masters of observation,
You're vicious.
they are fiercely aggressive, they're incredibly territorial, they're lightning fast, and their metabolism is so high they are constantly on the verge of starvation, constantly fighting.
A perfect metaphor for an empire to be.
In the Aztec worldview, they are solar warriors. The belief was that when a warrior died in battle, his soul would reincarnate as a humpty-nerd to accompany the sun on its daily journey across the sky.
So Huitzilopochtli wasn't a fluffy mascot. He was the manifestation of willpower, war, and the sun itself.
Exactly. And this solar hummingbird gives them a mandate.
What's the order?
He tells them to pack up and leave Aztlan. He tells them to walk south until they find a very specific sign, and he gives them a crucial instruction regarding their identity. They must change their name.
From what to what?
They are no longer the Azteca, the people of Aztlan. They must become the Mexica.
And this kicks off what is essentially the longest road trip in history.
A very, very long one.
But reading the timeline, this wasn't just a march, was it? It was a generational odyssey.
It lasted roughly 200 years. Imagine that for a moment.
2 centuries of wandering.
Your grandfather is born on the trail, you are born on the trail, your grandchildren are born on the trail. Your entire cultural memory is one of movement. They would stop, plant corn, live somewhere for a decade, maybe 2.
And then what?
And then the priests who are carrying this heavy, sacred idol bundle of the god would say, the hummingbird says move, and they would just abandon their homes and go.
That's an incredible amount of faith. So by the time they finally arrive in the Promised Land, the Valley of Mexico, it's around 1250 CE.
Yes.
And this is where the reality check hits. I think we assumed they arrived and just took
Yeah.
over, but the valley was already full.
Oh, it was packed. The Valley of Mexico was the center of civilization. It was filled with massive, wealthy city-states like Culhuacan and Azcapotzalco.
And these weren't just random cities. They had history.
Deep history. These people traced their lineage back to the Toltecs, the great ancient civilization that had collapsed centuries prior. Having Toltec blood was like having a royal pedigree in medieval Europe.
So they looked at the Mexican.
These dusty, bow-wielding wanderers speaking a rough dialect of their language.
And saw them as what?
As squatters, as vermin, as the unwanted immigrants of the 13th century.
So they are chased from place to place.
Constantly. They tried to settle on a hill called Chapultepec, Grasshopper Hill, which is a beautiful park in Mexico City today. But back then, the neighbors essentially ganged up on them, massacred them, and enslaved the survivors.
It seems like every time they tried to put down roots, they got kicked.
It gets worse before it gets better. The survivors, a really beaten-down group, beg the king of Culhuacan for asylum. He's this powerful local ruler.
And he agrees.
Sort of. He decides to use them as mercenaries, essentially saying, fine, you can live here, but you have to live in Tizapan.
And Tizapan is?
A rocky patch of volcanic land that was legendary for being infested with venomous snakes.
So the king was trying to kill them off.
It was a passive-aggressive way of committing genocide. He assumed the snakes would bite them, or at least drive them away, and that would be the end of the dog people problem.
But that's not what happened.
Not at all. When he sent emissaries to check on them later, he found the Mexica thriving.
Because they ate the snake.
They roasted them.
I love this detail because it shows their adaptability. It's so core to their character. You try to kill us with snakes, we'll make them into barbecue. It transforms a death sentence into a food source.
It proved their resilience. They were tough. But their stay in Culhuacan ends with one of the most gruesome and pivotal moments in their history. This is the story of the flayed princess.
I remember reading this in the source material and actually pausing. It is heavy. But I think we need to unpack it carefully because it explains so much about their theology.
It does. It is the moment that defines the gap between the Mexica and their neighbors.
Yeah.
So the Mexica, trying to integrate and perhaps gain some of that royal legitimacy we talked about.
They needed a plan.
They go to the king of Culhuacan and they ask for his daughter. They told him they wanted to make her a goddess.
And the king, thinking in traditional political terms, assumes this means a marriage alliance. His daughter marries the Mexica chief. Their grandkids inherit the throne. It's standard medieval diplomacy.
Exactly what he thought. A brilliant move for him. So he sends his beloved daughter to their camp. A few days later, the king arrives for what he thinks is the wedding ceremony. He enters the dark temple, incense is burning, drums beating. He sees a priest dancing in the candlelight. The priest is wearing a ceremonial robe, but as the king steps closer, His eyes adjust to the gloom.
Oh, no.
He realizes the robe is not made of cotton or silk. It is the flayed skin of his daughter.
The horror that King must have felt is unimaginable. But here's the question that I think every listener is screaming right now. Why? Why would they do that if they were trying to make friends?
This is where we have to suspend our modern morality and look at it through their theological lens. To the king, it was a barbarous, monstrous atrocity. But to the Mexica,
It was an honor.
it was a literal transformation. By flaying her, she had shed her human form, quite literally, and become Tozi, the goddess of nature. In their minds, they had honored her in the highest way possible. They weren't trying to insult the king. They genuinely thought he would be pleased that his daughter was now an immortal deity.
That is a cultural disconnect of fatal proportions.
Indeed. The king did not see the divinity. He summoned his army and chased them into the swamp. He drove them into the marshy, uninhabitable center of Lake Texcoco. This was rock bottom.
So this is the lowest of the low.
It is the year 1325. They are exhausted, hated by everyone, and hiding in the reeds of a saltwater lake. Everything has gone wrong.
But this brings us to the moment of destiny, the prophecy.
Yes. Huitzilopochtli had promised them a sign, a very specific one. And there, in the middle of this swamp, on a small rocky island, they saw it.
An eagle.
An eagle, perched on a prickly pear cactus.
Which is the image right in the center of the Mexican flag today.
The very same. The legend says the eagle was devouring a snake, symbolizing their triumph over the land, and perhaps callback to their time in Tizapan, though some early texts say it was just singing.
But either way, the message was clear.
Unmistakable. This is the spot.
In the middle of a lake, no wood, no stone, just mud and flies.
Logic would dictate you move to the shore, you find a better place. But destiny dictated they build right there. And this decision to build on pudding, as it were, forced them to become the greatest engineers of their time.
Okay, let's double-click on that engineering. Because looking at the sources, it seems like Tenochtitlan, the city they built, shouldn't have physically existed. How do you build a massive stone city on a swamp?
You don't just build on the land, you create the land. They perfected and really scaled up a system called chinampas.
We often call them floating gardens, but you said that's a bit of a misnomer.
It is, because they didn't float freely like rafts. They were anchored islands, solid ground, reclaimed from the lake.
So terraforming, how does that process work specifically?
It's a brilliant grasp of bioengineering. You start by weaving a massive basket out of reeds. Imagine a giant rectangular fence in the water. You stake this into the shallow lake bed. Then the real work begins.
Dredging.
Yes. You start dredging up the nutrient-rich mud from the bottom of the lake and piling it into this reed basket until it rises above the waterline.
Okay, but mud washes away. How do you keep it solid? How does it not just turn back into a mud pie when it rains?
That's the genius part. They planted ahuehuet trees, a native willow, at the corners of these islands. The roots of these trees grow straight down and very fast. They acted as living concrete piles, locking the land in place.
Like organic rebar.
A perfect analogy. They were literally weaving the land together with tree roots.
And the benefit of this wasn't just land for housing, right? I was reading about the agricultural yields, and they seem almost impossible.
It was a caloric engine. This is what fueled the empire. Because the soil was always moist from the lake, they didn't have to wait for rain. It was self-irrigating.
And self-fertilizing.
Constantly. They were always dredging up new algae and silt from the lake bottom and piling it on top.
Yeah.
It was the most fertile land imaginable. They could harvest crops up to 7 times a year.
7 times.
7. Compare that to Europe at the same time, where you were lucky to get 1 or 2 harvests before winter froze everything. Tenochtitlan was producing a massive food surplus. Corn, beans, squash, tomatoes, chilies.
And a food surplus means?
It means you can have people who aren't farmers. You can have soldiers, priests, artisans, builders. You can't have a massive empire if you can't feed the army. The Chinampas built the army.
So they build the land, they grow the food, but they also built a metropolis. The descriptions of Tenochtitlan in the 1300s sound incredible.
It is an urban planner's dream, a perfect grid layout with canals instead of streets.
The Venice of the New World.
That's what the Spanish called it, yes. But here is where they really shame the Europeans of the time. Sanitation.
We always hear about how dirty medieval Europe was.
It was filthy. Open sewers, chamber pots thrown out of windows into the street. London and Paris were disgusting. But Tenochtitlan, They had a team of 1,000 public street sweepers who scrubbed the city daily.
1,000 people just for cleaning.
And they had a department of sanitation, essentially, barges that would go through the canals collecting human waste.
And they used it right. It wasn't just dumped.
Exactly. It was a closed-loop system. The waste was sold to the farmers to fertilize the chinampas. Nothing was wasted. It was sustainable by design.
Okay, what about fresh water? They're in a saltwater lake, Lake Texcoco. They couldn't drink the water surrounding them.
Another engineering marvel, they built a massive aqueduct running from the freshwater springs at Chapultepec.
Grasshopper Hill, where they'd been massacred.
The very same place. They ran it for miles across the lake and into the heart of the city. But it wasn't just one pipe.
It was a twin-pipe aqueduct. Why two?
Redundancy and maintenance. If one pipe needed cleaning or repair, they could simply divert the water to the other. The flow of fresh water into the city never stopped.
So while Londoners were drinking from the polluted Thames,
the Mexicar were watching crystal-clear spring water cascade into public fountains and being distributed through clay pipes to individual homes. It was a different world.
it's impressive. But a beautiful city is a target. And they were still surrounded by hostile neighbors. They needed to defend this floating palace.
That's where the causeways come in. They built 3 massive land bridges connecting the island to the mainland. These were huge engineering works in their own right, but they built them with a very specific defensive mechanism.
Not just a road.
No, they were built in sections, with gaps spanned by removable wooden bridges.
Like drawbridges.
Exactly. If an enemy army tried to attack down one of those narrow causeways, the Mexica would just pull up the wooden planks.
And the army is stuck.
Stuck on the causeway, totally exposed, while Mexico warriors in thousands of canoes rain arrows and spears on them from the water. It turned the entrance to the city into a death trap.
So by the late 1300s, they have the city, they have the food, they have the defenses. But they are still technically new money. They don't have the royal blood.
Right. In Mesoamerica, legitimacy was everything, and the gold standard for legitimacy was the Toltecs. If you couldn't trace your bloodline back to them, you were just a warlord, a powerful thug.
You lacked the divine right to rule.
Precisely. So, the Mexica did something fascinating and really pragmatic. They went shopping for a king.
They imported a monarch.
They went back to Culhuacan, and you have to appreciate the irony here, the city where they flayed the princess, and they asked for a prince who had Toltec blood. They essentially said, we need a CEO with the right resume to make our company look good.
And Culhuacan agreed to this.
They did. They sent a man named Acamapixtli.
What does that name mean?
Handful of reeds. He becomes the first Laterani. This is the title for the Aztec Emperor,
Which means
the one who speaks.
that is a very poetic title. Not the ruler or the boss, but the speaker.
It implies he is the voice of the people and the intermediary for the gods. So, Acamapixtli arrives. He marries 20 wives from the local Mexican nobility to spread that precious Toltec DNA into the bloodline. And suddenly, the Mexica are legitimate players.
Because even with the new king, they were still under the thumb of a bigger power, right? They weren't the top dogs yet.
Not even close. They were vassals of the Tepanecs. The Tepanec Empire was ruled by a man named Tezozomoc.
The godfather.
You can think of him as the godfather of the valley. He ran a protection racket. The Mexica had to pay him tribute and, more importantly, fight his wars as his personal mercenaries, his hitmen.
This seems to be how they leveled up their military, though.
Yeah.
Fighting someone else's wars.
Exactly. For decades, they served as the muscle for the Tepanec Empire. They gained experience, they learned tactics, they built a reputation for ferocity. But in 1426, the godfather dies.
And that changes everything.
Because his son, Maxla, takes over. And Maxla is, well, the sources paint him as a psychopath. He decides he doesn't want to tax the Mexica anymore. He wants to exterminate them.
This is the existential crisis.
This is do or die. Maxla blockades the city. No food can get in or out. The Mexicans are starving. He murders their king, Chimalpopoca. The city council wants to surrender.
They're ready to give up.
They were ready to give up their god, give up their city, and go back to being slaves. But 2 men stood up in the council. One was the new king, Itzcoatl. The other was his nephew, the general, Tlacaelel.
And what do they propose?
They basically argue for a suicide mission. They say, we attack. If we lose, we die with honor. If we win, we take it all. It's an all-or-nothing gamble.
But they couldn't do it alone. The Tepanecs were too powerful.
No, they needed an ally. They found one in the rightful heir to the throne of Texcoco, a city oppressed by the Tepanecs. His name was Nezahualcoyotl.
The poet king.
He is one of the most fascinating figures in history. a philosopher, an engineer, a brilliant poet, and a ruthless warrior. Maxilla had killed his father, so he wanted revenge.
So the alliance is formed.
The Triple Alliance. The Mexica of Tenochtitlan, they were the muscle. Texcoco, led by Nezahualcóyotl, they were the brains and the engineers. And a smaller city called Tlacopan, which was part of the Tepanec Empire that defected.
And this triple alliance is what we call the Aztec Empire.
Correct. In 1428, they crushed Maxilla. They dismantled the Tepanec Empire. And suddenly, after centuries of struggle, the squatters were the masters of the Valley of Mexico.
And this is where the story takes a dark, Orwellian turn. Victory wasn't enough for Tlacopan.
Tlacopan is the Shadow King. He's the architect of the empire. He never took the throne himself, but he pulled the strings for decades. After the victory, he did something radical. He ordered the burning of the books.
He burned their own history. That sounds counterintuitive.
He gathered all the old records, all the codices that showed the Mexica as the dog people, as humble mercenaries and wanderers, and he burned them.
Why?
He said, "It is not fitting that the common people should know the paintings." He wanted to retcon reality. He created a new state-sanctioned narrative where the Mexico were always the chosen people of the sun, destined to rule.
A divine mandate.
And this wasn't just about ego, it was about theology. This is where we get the cosmic debt.
The doctrine of the fifth sun.
Exactly. Tlacopan solidified the idea that the universe runs on a precious energy called chalchihuatl, which means precious water, but it's a metaphor for blood.
The idea being?
The gods sacrificed themselves to create our world, the fifth sun. So humans have an eternal debt to pay them back with the only thing of equal value, their own blood.
It transforms war into a utility, a necessary function.
Precisely. If they don't offer blood, the sun will literally stop moving, the stars will fall, and the universe will die. Imperialism became a religious duty. War became a harvest for cosmic fuel.
This brings us to the mid-1400s. The empire is expanding, but then nature strikes back.
Massively. A little ice age hit the valley in the 1450s. For 4 years, the climate went haywire. The sources mention locust plagues, devastating floods, and even snow in the valley.
Which would have been unheard of.
Totally. The crops failed. It was called the Great Famine, or the Year of One Rabbit. People sold their children into slavery for a handful of corn, not out of cruelty, but just so the child would be fed by someone else. It was total desperation.
And the priests, having just established this chosen people narrative, had to explain why the gods were starving them.
Their conclusion was terrifyingly logical within their own system. The gods are weak, they are hungry, we aren't giving them enough blood.
But they had already conquered everyone nearby.
Right. There was no one left to fight, so they invented the flower wars.
Just Juiatl. This is a concept that is so hard for modern minds to grasp. War as a sport.
It was war by appointment. The Aztecs would literally call up their enemies, like the independent state of Tlaxcala, and schedule a battle. They'd meet on a designated field on a certain day.
And the goal wasn't to kill.
The primary goal wasn't to kill on the battlefield, no. It was to injure and capture. It was a catch-and-carry operation to supply victims for the altar. You wanted to bring your opponent back alive.
It answers the question of why they never conquered Tlaxcala, even though it was right next door and they hated each other.
They kept Tlaxcala independent as a farm for captives, a ready supply of worthy warriors to feed the gods. A decision that would eventually fatally doom them.
But for now, the machine was working. We moved to the late 1400s and the reign of Ahuitzotl.
The Alexander the Great of the Aztecs.
A terrifying nickname.
He was a monster of a conqueror. He named himself after a mythical spiny water beast that drowned people. He expanded the empire from the Pacific to the Gulf Coast, bringing in tropical goods like cacao and jaguar pelts for the first time.
And he's the one responsible for the Templo Mayor reconsecration.
In 1487, yes, the River of Blood. The numbers here are just staggering.
The sources claim 80,400 victims were sacrificed in 4 days.
Yes.
Logistically, is that even possible?
It's highly debated. It's almost certainly hyperbole, propaganda. You'd need to be sacrificing about 14 people a minute continuously for 96 hours.
Oh, it's an exaggeration.
But even if we cut it down to a more realistic number, say 20,000, it was an industrial slaughter on a scale the world had never seen. And Ahuitzotl invited the kings of his enemy states to watch from a grandstand.
Shock and awe diplomacy.
He was showing them that the Aztecs had so much life, so much power, they could afford to literally throw it away. This is what we do to our captives. Defy us, and this is your fate.
The Huitzotl dies in a freak accident, hitting his head while fleeing a flood caused by a failed aqueduct project, which is very ironic.
The ultimate engineer killed by his own engineering failure.
And he leaves the empire at its absolute peak to his nephew. And this is where the players are set for the final act. Enter Moctezuma II.
Moctezuma II is often misunderstood. He's portrayed as a coward, but initially he wasn't. He was a seasoned warrior, he led many campaigns, but he's also a priest, a theologian. He was obsessed with order, ritual, and cleanliness.
He sounds almost neurotic. The sources say he fired all the commoners in the palace because he didn't want ordinary people looking at him.
He was a germaphobe who bathed multiple times a day. He was an intellectual, but also deeply arrogant. He created a glass house. He isolated the nobility from the people, creating a fragile, top-heavy society.
And he was superstitious.
Deeply. In the years leading up to 1519, he started seeing omens everywhere.
The comet, which they called a tongue of fire. The temple of Huitzilopochtli spontaneously catching fire.
The weeping woman in the streets at night crying for her lost children, the origin of the La Llorona legend.
And the bird with the mirror.
That's the strangest one. A fisherman brings him a strange bird with a mirror in its head. And when Moctezuma looks into it, he sees men riding on creatures that look like giant deer. He was psychologically crumbling before the Spanish even arrived.
Because the year 1519 was special.
It was one read in their calendar. And that was the year the god Quetzalcoatl was prophesied to return from the east.
So he's waiting for a god. And instead, he gets a lawyer.
Hernán Cortés.
I love this detail. Cortés wasn't a general. He wasn't some great Spanish nobleman. He was a failed law student.
He was a notary, a bureaucrat with a gambling problem and a reputation for getting into trouble with women. He stole the fleet from the governor of Cuba, Diego Velázquez, to launch this expedition. He was a mutineer.
So when he landed in Mexico, he wasn't conquering for the King of Spain.
He was running from the Cuban police. He was committing treason.
That explains his obsession with legal maneuvering. He founds the city of Veracruz on the coast.
A city of about 100 people, a total fiction.
Just to create a legal entity that could appoint him Captain General, bypassing the governor of Cuba?
Exactly. He used the law to justify his illegal actions, and then he scuttled the ships.
The famous burn the ships moment, though you noted he actually drilled holes in them to sink them. Less dramatic, but more practical.
He had to. His men were terrified. Many of them were loyal to the governor and wanted to go back. By sinking the ships, he told them, there is no ticket B, we win this continent or we die here.
But Cortés, with his 500 men, couldn't have done anything without help. He finds a secret weapon. A woman.
La Malinche, or as the Spanish called her, Doña Marina. She is arguably the single most important figure in the conquest besides Cortés himself.
What's her story?
She was a noblewoman from a Nahuatl-speaking region who was sold into slavery to Maya speakers. So she was bilingual.
She became the telephone line.
An incredibly complex one. Cortés spoke Spanish to a shipwreck survivor he found, a guy named Aguilar. Aguilar spoke Maya to Malinche, and Malinche spoke Nahuatl to the Aztec emissaries.
But she was more than a translator.
Oh, she was a cultural interpreter, a political advisor. She told Cortés who was lying, who was weak, who hated the Aztecs, and how to manipulate the politics of the land. She gave him the cheat codes to the empire.
There was a huge debate about whether she was a traitor or a survivor.
Traitor to whom? The Aztecs weren't her people. They were the brutal empire that oppressed her world. She used the Spanish to burn down the system that enslaved her. She was brilliant.
So Cortés marches inland, and he runs right into Tlaxcala.
The Aztecs left alive in their backyard. At first, the Tlaxcalans attack Cortés with everything they have. And this is where we have to bust the myth that the Spanish just steamrolled everyone with guns and steel.
They almost lost.
The Tlaxcalans almost wiped them out. Their cannons were slow to load, their crossbows were cumbersome, and their numbers were tiny.
And there's that incredible moment where they decapitate a horse.
A crucial moment. The indigenous people at first thought the horse and rider were one supernatural monster, a centaur. When a Tlaxcalan warrior lops the head off a horse with a single swing of his obsidian sword, they realize they are meat, they bleed, they can be killed.
But the Tlaxcalan Senate, after fierce debate, decides to make a deal.
The old logic. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. They hated the Mexica more than they feared the Spanish.
And this changes the math entirely.
It's the whole ballgame. Cortés goes from having 500 Spanish soldiers to having a massive allied army of thousands of elite Tlaxcalan warriors. They march together to Cholula, the holy city of the Aztecs, and massacre the nobles there in a preemptive strike based on Malinche's intelligence.
And Moctezuma's watching this from Tenochtitlan.
He watches from afar, sees the holy city burn, sees that its gods didn't strike the Spanish down, and his fear just deepens. He concludes they must be the gods they claim to be.
So he invites them in, November 8, 1519, the meeting on the causeway.
It is the most cinematic moment in history, the collision of two worlds. The pristine, perfumed emperor carried on a litter, meeting these rusty, smelly, bearded aliens.
And Cortés tries to hug him.
The forbidden hug, the guards almost killed Cortés right there on the causeway. You do not touch the solar deity.
But the real tragedy is the speech Moctezuma gives.
A fatal misunderstanding. He gives a flowery, ritual welcome speech. My house is your house. You have come to sit on your throne. He is being ritually polite.
And Cortés, the lawyer,
interprets it as a legal surrender of the empire. He writes back to the King of Spain saying, he just handed me the keys.
So they enter the city. They are guests, but they are also trapped. They are in a golden cage.
They're surrounded by hundreds of thousands of warriors. They know they're vulnerable, so Cortés does the unthinkable. He marches into the palace and kidnaps the emperor.
He takes Moctezuma hostage in his own palace.
And for months, they rule the empire through him like a puppet. They discover the secret treasure room of Moctezuma's father, Cayacatl, this vast hoard of gold, and they just melt down centuries of priceless art into crude gold bars. It's a heist movie.
But the tension is building. The city is a powder keg, and Cortés has to leave.
He has to go to the coast to fight a rival Spanish army sent from Cuba to arrest him. He leaves his hot-headed deputy, Pedro de Alvarado, in charge, and Alvarado panics.
The Tlaxcalan massacre.
During a major religious festival, Alvarado sees the Aztec nobility gathered and dancing unarmed. He thinks it's the start of an uprising, so he locks the gates to the temple courtyard and slaughters them all. Men, women, priests.
And that's the spark.
That is the spark that blows up the powder keg. The city wakes up. They stop fearing the gods and start attacking the murderers. Cortés fights his way back into the city, but he's just walking back into a trap.
Moctezuma is sent out to the roof to calm the crowd.
And he is stoned to death by his own people. They call him a coward and a traitor.
Though some sources say the Spanish killed him afterwards.
The records conflict. Did he die of his wounds, or did the Spanish murder him because he was no longer useful? We'll never know for sure, but the result is the same. The emperor is dead. The Spanish are trapped. They have to run.
La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows.
June 30th, 1520. A rainy, stormy night. The Spanish try to sneak out over the causeway using a portable wooden bridge they built, but an old woman fetching water sees them and raises the alarm.
And the city descends on them.
The Aztecs swarm the lake in canoes. They pull up the other bridges. It's a slaughter. The Spanish, who are smart, drop their gold and run.
And the ones who are greedy.
The soldiers who stuffed their pockets and armor with gold bars drowned because they were too heavy to swim. And then you get the image of the bridge of corpses.
The gaps in the causeway filled up with so many dead bodies and horses that the survivors in the rear could literally walk across them to safety.
Cortés makes it to shore, and the chronicles say he sat under a tree and wept. He lost 2/3 of his Spanish troops and thousands of his Tlaxcalan allies. The Aztecs had won.
But they didn't finish him off. They let him escape. And they didn't know that one of the dead Spaniards left a parting gift.
Smallpox, the invisible army.
A single African slave in the army of the man Cortés went to fight was infected. The virus found the perfect breeding ground.
It tore through Tenochtitlan. It was a biological nuke. This was a virgin soil epidemic. The Aztecs had zero immunity.
What were the mortality rates?
At least 40% mortality in 60 days. It killed Cuitlahuac, the new hero emperor who had driven the Spanish out. It broke the chain of command. It destroyed the economy. It shattered the spirit of the city. While the Aztecs were dying in their beds, Cortés was in Tlaxcala rebuilding.
This brings us to the logistics of the IKEA Navy. This is the part of the story that always blows my mind.
It is brilliant military engineering. Cortés realizes he can't take the causeways. The Aztecs are too good at defending them. He needs to control the lake.
But his ships are at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico.
So he decides to build a new navy. In the mountains of Tlaxcala, miles and miles from the water, he has his shipwright build 13 brigantines, small, fast warships armed with cannons.
But not on the water.
No, on land. He builds them in pieces, numbers every plank and beam, and then has 8,000 telex column porters carry the entire navy piece by piece over the mountains.
Like a giant IKEA flat pack.
Exactly. They reassembled them on the shores of Lake Texcoco. It must have been one of the most incredible sights in military history.
And this fleet effectively turned Tenochtitlan from an island fortress into a prison.
Absolutely. Once those ships hit the water, the Aztec canoes were no match. He cut the aqueducts, the fresh water stopped flowing, the food stopped coming in, the siege began. It was total war.
And when the city wouldn't surrender, he decided to erase it.
The demolition. The Aztecs were masters of urban warfare, fighting from the rooftops. So Cortés made a brutal decision. For every block they captured, they would systematically level every single building.
They flattened the Venice of the New World.
House by house. It was 93 days of grinding apocalyptic horror, starvation, thirst, constant battle. The last emperor, Cuauhtémoc, descending eagle, led a heroic resistance. Women were fighting from the rooftops, but it was hopeless.
Finally, on August 13, 1521, Cuauhtémoc is captured in a canoe trying to escape.
The resistance ends. The chronicles describe a deafening silence falling over the ruins of the city after 3 months of constant screaming.
Cuauhtémoc asks Cortés for the dagger.
He asks to be killed. He says, "Take your dagger and kill me now." He is asking for the honor of a warrior's sacrifice.
And Cortés refuses.
He refuses. He wants a subject, not a martyr. He wants to torture him for gold. It was the final insult.
But, and this is where we have to land the plane, is it really the end? The city is a smoking ruin. The leadership is dead. It feels final.
No, and this is the most important part of the entire story. It's not an end, it's a fusion. The Spanish built their new capital, Mexico City, directly on the ruins of Tenochtitlan.
Literally building on the bones.
The stones of the Great Temple were used to build the Metropolitan Cathedral. But more importantly, the Spanish married the Aztec nobility. The bloodlines merged. Cortés himself had a son with La Malinche, who is often called the first mestizo.
The birth of a new people.
Modern Mexico is the fusion of these two worlds. The language Nahuatl is still spoken by 1.5 million people. Words like chocolate, tomato, avocado, coyote, they're all Nahuatl.
The food conquered the world.
And the religion syncretized. The Virgin of Guadalupe, the patron saint of Mexico, her shrine is built on the exact spot of the temple to the Aztec mother goddess Tonantzin.
And the flag.
The flag is still the eagle and the snake on the cactus. The founding myth of Tenochtitlan is the national symbol of Mexico today.
So the fifth sun didn't set. It just rose on a new era.
Exactly. The Aztecs weren't wiped out. They were transformed. They became part of the foundation of one of the world's great modern cultures.
That is a powerful place to leave it. A story of resilience. From the swamp to the stars and back to the earth again.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Every modern city, every culture, what ghost is it built on top of?
Something to chew on. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.
Until next time.